Hi, everybody. Welcome to this week's episode of Making Light Two Humans Being. I'm Julie here, and with me today, as always, for this wild ride, because who knows where we're going today, is Kate Fago, partner in crime. So today we're going to talk about something that's been kind of percolating to the surface in my meditations, as well as in talking with wonderful Kate and another colleague of ours. I have an aversion to the word God. And I think I might know why, because I've done a little bit of thinking about this, but we're going to explore this a little bit deeper. So we're going to see where this all goes. You ready, Kate? Okay, so just to give everybody a little background. So Kate and I are soul level animal communicators. We are also newly certified soul level intuitive coaches. Woohoo, Kate, we did it. We're super excited about all of this. And Kate has even more modalities that she practices body code. I mean, she's got a lot of, she's really talented. She's got a lot of stuff on her. She's not going to accept
that. I'll pay you later.
But it's true. Anyway, yeah, she'll pay me later. So part of all this work, though, for me, and I'll let Kate talk about her experience, but part of learning all this work for me has become an increased awareness or in tune with spirituality. And meaning that I know we tap into a higher level of consciousness. That's also where the universe comes into play, universal laws. Oh, that's not me. Sorry, my phone is ringing. Universal laws and whatnot. And as I explore that even further, God has entered the picture. And I don't consider myself religious. I actually shun religion because when I don't know how many people know this story, but when I was a kid in the 7th grade in public schools, I went to catechism because I was raised Catholic. So when you go through Catholic education, not going to like Catholic school, but when you go through just regular Catholic education and you get ready to be confirmed, you go through catechism, Sunday school. It's part of all of it, in communion, all the things. But in 7th grade, I was getting ready for confirmation. I was going through catechism, and I had a teacher that one night told me that if you weren't Christian, you were going to hell. And my best friend at the time was Hindu. And I loved going to her house. I loved learning all about all of the deities that she had. She had them all over her house, and she would tell, Vishnu, she explained them all to me. I thought it was absolutely fascinating. I also had, when I had communion, my grandmother gave me the children's Bible, which I actually really enjoyed reading because it's stories. And I thought, I can relate to stories. I love reading and I love stories and I love writing stories. So it's just, it just kind of all meshed. But when my catechism teacher told me that my best friend was going to hell, I'm like, what do you mean she's going to hell? And I asked questions and he kept saying, nope, going to hell. And I gave him all the examples of how wonderful person she was, still is probably, I don't know where she is. Anyway, everything, she's a lovely human being, but she's going to hell. And I'm like, that doesn't make any sense. So I told my dad when I got out of class because I was bawling. And he had to ask me what was wrong. So I told him, and we stopped going to mass then, and we stopped going to catechism. We stopped that integration because he felt like that's not what the teachings are supposed to be. So then I had it in my head, religion, ew. And if someone was like super religious, then, and if you wanted to talk about God, no. But now that we're in this, I can see, and I'm going through A Course in Miracles, which is to some degree, there's a Christian theme through it, but that's because how it manifested. But the theme is actually universal, where a world based in love versus a world based in fear. So a lot of it makes sense to me in that regard. But every time I go to describe it to a client, because a lot of times my readings, a spiritual component or the universe or wherever will bring something in. And some of my guides are Jesus as a guide, Buddha's a guide, Mother Teresa's a guide, St. Francis of Assisi is a guide, as well as Gandhi. There's a religious or spiritual aspect to it. So my readings can sometimes get a little deep in that regard. And I hesitate every time the word God, which can be the easiest and fastest way to get to what I'm trying to express, comes up. I just feel myself going, ew, I don't really want to talk about that. So that's a little bit of background. I will say that part of why I think I have an aversion to it is there's a number of different, there's a lot of it's based in negative beliefs. So our soul level intuitive coaching approach usually works around one of 4 negative beliefs. We're all working on all 4 at any given time. In a session, our guides will pull out one to work on in that particular session, but it's not worthy, not good enough, not safe, secure, and protected, and not lovable. Those are the 4 main ones. And so I know that there's an aspect of this of not being worthy. There's also, I think, as I was meditating today, an aspect of not feeling safe, secure, protected, because like the teacher, who I should be in a safe, secure, protected environment in a classroom, kind of rocked my world by saying my best friend wasn't going to go to heaven. There's also ties back to my grandparents, my paternal grandparents that were Catholic, and it was a huge part that if we didn't go to mass, we had to, like, we would go, if we knew grandma was coming to visit, we'd go to mass the week before, so if she asked us anything that happened, we could talk to it, and then we wouldn't go to mass again. So there's this, it's all kind of tied up, but it feels very much like the word God, for me, from my past, this life, represents like power and control, and you have to think this way, and if you don't, bad things will happen, and if you don't, you're not worthy. So I feel like that's kind of where it begins with me, and I'll leave it at that and see what Kate, because I've talked for so long, I'll let Kate go from there.
You would have to explain those, but we'll get to that, because I don't see it quite the same, but then there's a lot going on in you that I can't see right now, obviously. I'm totally with you in the not liking religion, but I think I knew from a really young age that there was something. I think what it was for me, ironically, my mum's very religious, but it wasn't, for all my mum's fault, she didn't really force it on us. I mean, we had to go to church and stuff like that, but it was actually quite a low-key, friendly, it was a children's church, I think it was called. So my mum has always had a really strong faith, and in some ways I admired that in her when I had none. But it's so inbuilt in me. I also went to Catholic school. I was a non-Catholic, so we were scum, as you can imagine. We were non-Catholics. And one thing that my mother got really upset about was that we were lumped in with Hindus, Muslims, everyone else. Even though we were Christian and had the same God and the same Jesus and all of that, we were not allowed to partake in any, you were either Catholic or you were scum. But we also did actually, to be fair, have RE, religious education, that was about the history of religion, which was very interesting, because for me, I was just like, well, there's Christians, and then there's Catholics, and they believe in the Pope, and those of us that didn't, Protestants. That was as far as my understanding went, but all the rest of the tenets were there as far as I was concerned. Always wanted to be Catholic because they always got an hour off for mass every month, and every week we never did. So that was my experience of it. But I think what it was this, it was the line that Jesus will only forgive you if you are truly sorry. And my overthinking was sort of like, but I've done things that I know have hurt people, like piercing my nose as a later example, really upset my dad. I could never be forgiven for that, because actually I would do the same again. That was sort of the thing for me. It's like, if you know something, and I guess the difference there is, and this is very spiritual as opposed to religious, was even at that age I was like, but it's not wrong for me to pierce my nose. It's sad that it upsets somebody, and I don't wish to upset somebody, but I didn't see why me piercing my nose was evil. So there was all these questions about, looking at it now, of course, that is exactly what I push against religion for, is because it's actually a level of control and discipline on you that is not rooted in good and bad. It's rooted in what I tell you to. Mm-hmm. So I've been very anti. Having said that, my belief in God is almost automatic in some way, because it's so deep I can't question it. I'm just glad that spirituality has allowed me to reframe that.
Can you say the word God and not have...
Yeah, I have no issue with the word God. I don't like it because it's a bit religious, but in a way it actually, actually feels more real to me than not more real than the universe, but more powerful than the universe. But I also have that aversion to it. But that aversion is more that I don't want people to think I'm religious, as opposed to I don't want to believe in God. It's like I want to dissociate myself from. When we were reading, now who's the lady you do Course in Miracles with?
Oh, Marianne Williamson.
Yeah, and we read her book.
We would run over.
I found that the language in it, and when tell you what, when I read people talk about the blood of Christ and stuff like that, I'm like physically repulsed by it. I'm like, what are you people, vampires? Like, where does all this shit come from? It's like a pagan ritual, but even more distasteful. I feel the physical repulsion to that. That side of religion.
So a couple of things. So there's the mystics, which I want to come back to, but there's in A Course in Miracles, as far as like the language, like it's always God, and he's always in the he pronoun. Well, there's a whole, I could go off a bunch of tangents, just beep, beep, beep. There's God, and he uses the he pronoun, and then everyone who is from God, like us, are sons. And so he's father. I mean, it's all male pronouns and male words. And she says early on, as you begin the Course in Miracles, it's a 365-day study. There's a meditation every day, a lesson in meditation every day. She says early on, when you start the series with her, this is how it's written. It's written it's because language is a human creation, right? So it just came out this way. It doesn't mean our gender rules. So try as best you can to let that part go. That's been one of the hardest things to let go. But it also is part, now that I say this out loud, it's also part of what fuels my aversion to God, because what I remember when I was a kid and we would go to Mass, my favorite thing, so they give you these little books that you read about, and you can read ahead as to all the readings that are going to be read that day. They publish them, and then the songs. And so I'd read, because I'm a reader. I just sit there and I, don't really want to be there. So I know, and I wasn't allowed to bring my Nancy Drew with me. Like, come on. Anyway, so I would sit and read all the homily, and I would go, this contradicts this, like, and I would say these things to my mom, and she, shush, be quiet, especially if grandma was there. But I just remember feeling like I'd listen to these stories, and it was always the context with the homily would give the context around the reading that was told. If you read the reading actually from the Bible, okay, that kind of makes sense, like, whatever. But if you did, but sometimes the priest would create this context of you're sinning, he's the only good guy, he's out to get you. And so I have this thought, and when I hear the word God, I see a big old white guy telling me I'm not worthy. And I know that's like one of the biggest reasons why I have this aversion. It's just, and I feel, but here's the thing, then I'm like, okay, well, I can work on letting that go. The thing is, then when I use the word with people who believe that that's what God is, I can't, then I'm like, well, then I'm not getting through to them. That God is not that, he's love, right? And so then I'm like, but then I have to, and then that's resistant. Oh, I get all up in my head about it. It's just nice.
I am so indoctrinated that you even implying that God is female, I find a bit, I mean, this is it. Like, it's so deeply indoctrinating it, like consciously. I know it doesn't matter, it doesn't, whatever, but I feel like I don't know, like a 1970s person who's been told not to use the N-word, that sort of thing. I'm like, who are you people? Like, it's like, how dare you push things so far? I find it really uncomfortable, and not because I don't believe it, it's not that, but it's still like a shock to me to hear God being described as female, I think.
Yeah.
And I probably do see him as a white man with a beard, white hair, but I don't believe that. That's just almost surface habit, if you like, but it still jars. Do I think of God like that? Do you know what? I think why that has actually been reinforced as an adult is probably through Neil Donald Walsh, who actually looks like God, if you've ever seen him, how you would imagine God.
I've not looked, yeah.
his books about conversations with God, which have been really eye-opening for me, and they're brilliant, because there's so much humor, so much love, so much all of these things, and also it was those reading those books that first, I think, officially sort of, that I read from somebody who I respected, the fact that religion, as humans have created it, is nothing to do with love. It's nothing to do with God. It's, and I'm like, like someone else has actually articulated this and they've not been smoked, is that a word? That this may actually, there are other people that may think like me, that's like, wow. So yeah, I still have this surface image of God, but I don't really believe it. But I think there's still, just shows how deep our conditioning goes.
Yeah, absolutely. When you said that it's hard for you to hear that God would be feminine, I actually think it's just the balance between the divine feminine and the masculine, but it's even higher than that. Like us even defining that doesn't even put it into play. So, but that's a tangent. But when you said that you can't imagine God being a woman, there's a movie, I don't know if you ever saw it, called Dogma. It was starred Ben Affleck and Matt Damon and, oh gosh, Alan Rickman was in it. But anyways, and Salma Hayek. It's a fun movie, and I always gravitated to those movies that would mock religion or be a satire of religion or even be scandalous about Catholicism, like the Thornbirds. Love it because there is a Catholic priest is tempted by love from a woman and the affair that ensues. Oh my gosh, I just love that stuff because it's just like this. I don't understand all these rules that are in place when that's, to me, not ever what God or spirituality preaches. Anywho, but in the movie Dogma, at the very end, God appears because the movie's all about there's angels and they're trying to get somebody to do something. It's actually really funny. George Carlin plays a bishop. It's really funny. And at the end, God appears, and God is played by Alanis Morissette. And I thought that was the most brilliant thing I had ever seen. I'm like, yes, absolutely. A woman. And I've seen other films where she's played by a woman of color, or God is played by a woman of color. And that's always like, yeah, absolutely, I could get behind that. I get stuck, I guess, right now in thinking that when I try to talk to somebody about God, I would have to, I don't believe.
And that's why I would use the word universe, because to utter the words God publicly, the thought of being mistaken for somebody who's religious is, to me, absolutely abhorrent.
Yes, exactly.
So I would rather they thought I was a screaming lunatic than thought I was religious. So I would say the universe, source. I don't think even spirit to me is a bit.
I prefer divine. I do prefer divine, but
so
I also,
your objection is to the word God.
Yeah, that's.
I don't think, when you were talking about what you think your negative beliefs behind that are, you were talking about why you don't respect religion as opposed to why you react to that word.
Oh, see, I feel like that word represents all of that story to me.
Yes, and I do too, and that's just it. But yes, that would be it to me, is God. And even, and this is funny because, again, I'm embarrassed to admit it, but because the conditioning runs so deep, when I find quotes from Jesus that are then explained in a spiritual setting and of other people in the Bible, it holds a gravitas that I'm afraid I buy into, because it's like, oh, well, it must be true. Now, not that I've ever questioned that it's not true, since I have found spirituality in people, because there's no contradictions in it ever. And because nobody's putting anyone else down, and this is what is so compelling for me about the spiritual teachers, at least thus far, that I have found, is nobody's trying to outdo anybody. Nobody's telling you that what someone else isn't true. And to me, that just builds such a compelling case that I believe it must absolutely be true. So I'm embarrassed to say that now that I'm beginning to see that actually even the Bible and Jesus Christ and all that can be translated into a spiritual context, that warms my heart a little bit more. And I'm like, it shouldn't matter, but there is still, religion, I don't, is it acceptance, or is it just, it's almost like physical proof that it's all true, which is nonsense.
Yeah.
It's nonsense. And actually, we should read them in book club, the Conversations with God.
Yeah.
Because I mean, it's a bit technical. Parts of it for me would be beyond my understanding. I would probably be able to read, and I mean, as in technical, talking about the physics behind how evolution and the universe and God and all of that. It gets quite deep. Only briefly. I might get more understanding from it if I read it again, because I think I have more understanding of. It's basically another way of law of attraction, I suppose. That's a part of it, but like the physics behind it and stuff.
Yeah.
But it's a very interesting the way they describe religion, because long time ago someone said to me at work, one of the Garys had said, religion's all about control. I remember like that really hit me, like people dare, even when my husband said he was an atheist, it's like these people actually exist. Like atheists exist and they actually tell people. Like, how sheltered is my life that I had never come across an atheist. And daring to question a church, even though I have been very, very vocally against religion, when somebody actually said that, I still felt like it was some sort of slanderous comment that I wasn't quite sure what to do with.
Yeah.
And now that's actually exactly what I think. It's just another male dominated patriarchy, control, bunch of bastards. I hate them all. And I think that's true of all religions. Oh, I know, but it's like the Buddhists, right? I thought when I went on the Buddhist, there's nothing in Buddhism that you can object to, really, even as a spiritual person. They've all got their own little factions. They're all fighting and bitching and moaning about each other. And you're like, you of all people. And then you're just like, this is what religion does to people. Yeah. This is the same, I feel like this about Reiki, give people get something, make something wonderful, create it or not create it, but start to describe something they can share with the rest of the world. They build this beautiful edifice that they now go, here, look, all this stuff, it's not our work, but we're presenting it to you in a way that you can learn and grow from it. And then they end up in a hierarchy. Yeah. And as soon as they have a hierarchy, they're not doing anyone any favors.
I know. It was interesting when you talked about Jesus, like for you, when you see that Jesus said something, it brings a gravitas to it. And to me, that's another word though, for it's not God, whatever, it doesn't matter, but that's another word though.
Yeah, Christ, Jesus, yeah. But Jesus has the names.
I've had so many people in my life, not just Catholics, but Protestants too, who would sit there and try and tell me that different people didn't matter because Jesus said so. And I feel like there's a usage of both of those words, God and Jesus, that to me is ultimately blasphemous from what the actual teaching was. And it's so misunderstood and it's so convoluted, and it's done it in a way to separate people and to go, I'm good, you're bad, I'm a Christian. I remember I went to see Maya Angelou. I saw her twice live read before she passed away. Maya Angelou, the poet and writer, author. Okay. We're going to put her in the show notes. You need some Maya Angelou. She's awesome. She is probably not reincarnating. She's probably going to be a ascended master. Anyway, where I mostly grew up, I did a lot of my growing up in a very conservative town that is dominated by a Protestant religion. When we moved there, we were one of very few Catholics, and actually the real estate agent told my mom we should live on a certain side of town because that's where the other Catholics lived. My mom didn't want anything to do with that side of town because she liked the houses and the school system on the other side. Anyway, so so we grew up in this area. It's in the area that I currently live in too, and it's predominated by a certain part of the Protestant church, right? Because there's many factions of the Protestant church. This one's very conservative. And she comes to this town where I live to speak. And she's in the hotel auditorium of one of the prominent families of that faction of Christianity. And she's like, oh my gosh, she comes out on stage. She's so beautiful. Anyway, she comes out on stage and she's like, oh my gosh, I'm so excited to be here. She's like, I was walking down the hallway of the hotel and I had people coming up to me saying to me, oh my God, Maya Angelou, I'm a Christian. Oh my God, Maya Angelou, I'm a Christian. I'm a Christian. And she's like, already? How did you get to be a Christian already? I'm like in my 70s and I'm still working on it. And I was like, yes, like, this is why, I mean, one of the many reasons why I love her, but it was just so interesting. And I also have a phrase too, where people will say, they'll do this whole sentence, I'm a Christian, but so and so and so is not up to my stand, like that kind of a phrase. And so we call them Christian buts anyway. So that's another reason why the word Jesus and God, I have a little bit of aversion, because it's used to separate people. And now that I'm, as well as this work that we're doing, and I'm also studying the mystics, I've been attracted, and my guides have led me to studying the Christian mystics. Right now, I really want to study just mystics as a whole, regardless of whatever faith they practice. But the mystics, and to some degree, I want to say they're making a comeback, but they saw the world as the natural order of everything integrated. So regardless of what life form you are here for a reason. Humans are no better. They're not higher in any type of hierarchy than a tree, than a dog. We're all have our own rules to play. And they saw, just like indigenous people talk about too, they saw the natural order of things, and that when things get out of balance, disease, all that other stuff, this is when stuff happens. And this is when when we lose that separation from that natural order of everything and God, which is really love one another, see the connectedness, that's when crap hits the fan. And so I find that teaching, when Jesus is a mystic, when you read what he actually said, it's for me to use his name sometimes in certain conversations. People are like, oh, good, then you join my church. It's like, no, I don't want to join your church. I'm going to
So
hear.
explain for the benefit of everyone else, because obviously I remember from the last time, what a mystic is.
Oh, a mystic. Okay. A mystic is actually, I would say, I would define it? So the ones that I'm studying are like Hildegard of Bingen, Julian of Norwich, Thomas Aquinas, St. Francis of Assisi.
They're scholars.
They were scholars, but they also, like Hildegard of Bingen was a nun, and she started 2 monasteries back in the 1400s, maybe earlier than that. I can't remember her time frame. St. Francis of Assisi came from a very wealthy family and broke off and started his own order. So if you hear Franciscan priests, they're of the order of St. Francis of Assisi. He's also, of course, the patron saint of animals, so a particular favorite of mine. He's actually the only saint I know anything about. Mother Teresa is considered to be a mystic, more modern day. There are people, Matthew Fox, that I've referred to on this show before, is a mystic, and you will hear people that really talk. Mirabai Starr is also a current figure who.
But what do you mean by mystic?
What I mean by mystic? Mystics believe in the integration of all things, meaning that all life forms, we're all here for a reason. They also believe that God, whatever the creator is, the divine, is love. And it is our role here on the planet to come at things from a place of love based on a place of fear. I was just reading this morning Desmond Tutu, probably a little more mystic than standard religious, but he was saying it is, something, I'm going to get the first part of it wrong, which is that universe is all this wonderful love and electricity and everything, and we're the light bulbs, and our only job is to make sure we stay screwed in to the electricity and the current of love on this planet. So they believe more of that, the holistic, welcoming everybody. There is no, like, this idea of, gay versus heterosexual, that doesn't exist in mysticism, because everybody is everybody, and everybody's here, and love is love. It doesn't matter how it expresses itself, it is. And that's and shouldn't be separation. God is not an entity looking down trying to punish. God is like, come alongside me and co-create.
Which is very much the religious aspect, and that's where the control comes in, isn't it?
Yeah.
Is you do this or else you'll go to hell.
Yeah. And I haven't actually looked into the word mystic as to where it came from, but for me, I'll just say it feels very much like the people that are mystics see the mystery of everything that's going on around us and jump into it and embrace it instead of,
Right.
oh, I'm afraid of it. It must be some, and put it way up here and it's coming to get me.
And there is an implication, or unless it's just me in translation, that they see more than just the physical.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. Hildegard of Bingen, back in the day, I mean, for a woman, she was so powerful. And she used to tell the Pope off, because at the time that she was around, the church started to get more masculine, toxic masculinity start to separate away, forgot the people it was serving. Thomas Aquinas actually was the one that, I think it was him, was adamant about talking to people in the language that they spoke, because at that time in that area, it was what they would call Low German, and the church wanted to speak in Latin. Well, these people didn't speak Latin. So Thomas Aquinas was like, talk to the people like they want to be talked to, so we can bring them along and embrace them. But anyway, what was I starting to say? Oh, she would do, so she had 2 different monasteries. Good on her. She would tell the Pope to go, dude, you're wearing no clothes, like chill out, like this isn't what it's all about. But she was also a painter. She wrote the music that if you ever go on like Spotify or iTunes and you just search on Hildegard of Bingen, there's Gregorian chants. Her contribution to that type of music is so complex, and it's just because it was channeled from the divine, is what they say. I mean, it's just amazing. But she was like this multifaceted, awesome woman, co-creationist, I would say, from a law of attraction standpoint. Yeah, that was my little tangent.
That's really interesting how this all comes together, because actually going back to conversations with God, this is what it sort of says. Everything, be it religion, be it government, be it a club, be it whatever, it says when it gets to the point where it starts to serve its own purpose, like its existence reaches a point where it is no longer, I think he is Neil Donald Walsh channeling God, so I assume it was male, but that's just an assumption, isn't it? Presumably because I think Neil used he, but I suspect he prefixed it with whatever.
Mm-hmm.
When something reaches this sort of critical mass almost, that it takes on a life of its own, it is no longer serving what it was created for.
Mm-hmm.
And that's true of everything. And the other example I think he used was medicine, that medicine has reached a point where it's almost, I want to say, they get too big for their boots. That's really what it is, that the structure of the organization they have created suddenly becomes the focus as opposed to what they were created for. So when medicine stops being about doing the best for people and being about promoting medicine, then you've lost it. And that's very true of all the things you described there about religion and the Pope and everything like that. It reached a point where its own importance became about the religion and not about, if you're trying to teach people in a language they don't understand, what's the point in that? That's not serving the people.
Right. And medicine's a good example. Part of so as humans came onto the planet, and then systems of belief were developed, and you look at paganism, you look at indigenous beliefs, you look at African beliefs, the people that were here originally, they're all actually really very similar. And I'm sure Islam, and I'm sure they're all very, very similar because they feel very similar. I can only talk about it from what I've studied so far. So you have all these belief systems, they're all really kind of similar about this integration, and we're part of a larger system in this connection to nature. And the mystics then come in, how they became about, I'm not sure, but that's why Christianity has a lot of pagan beliefs, is because the mystics also saw that all of that belief and went further with it. And it became Christianity to a degree. The thing that changed it was, when you talk about health, was the bubonic plague took place. So you have everybody practicing as they would back then, with the beliefs in the sun had power, the moon had power, the equinox, the solstices, all of it. And it was all part of the rites that they would do even in a monastery. The bubonic plague happens. People are dying, people are freaking out, and they needed to blame something instead of seeing the connectedness of, we were getting a little out of balance, money, corruption, power, we were getting out of balance. Instead of seeing it that way, oh my God, there's rats. We need to now condemn rats. And so they put all the blame on rats. Wasn't necessarily true, I guess, from what I read. But what really happened was then the church began to separate itself from the natural world. It blamed the natural world for the bubonic plague and for all these people dying, instead of seeing that there was something greater taking place and how to tap into that. And that, in a nutshell, I'm sure there was more to it than that, but from what I've studied, that's one of the key stakes in the beginning of the division between religion and the integration of nature. It's my little speech, my little lecture today. So anyway, yeah. And it's interesting too, that Conversations with God book, I remember when it came out, and I remember going, no, because the word God's in it. Like, hell no, I'm not reading that. But
I don't, why did I read it? I don't know. It's actually, there is Neil Donald Walsh does, there's something on Prime that he does, Conversations with Neil, I think it's called, Neale. I'll put it on the in the show notes. I just think he's brilliant. He's just brilliant. But yeah, his third book that I actually, it was just a bit too complicated for me. Like, I think I'm quite clever, but you have to really want to read some stuff, and I'm not sure I do. But yeah, very interesting. But it still doesn't, we'll need to look at the actual word God. I think it is, as you say, it's you don't want to be associated with the religious aspect. I think it's that simple.
No, you know what though? I just realized, my God's just said, there is an aspect though of needing to embrace that aspect to bring it to light. Not that it's up to, but by us talking about this, there is also an embracing of that thought system and saying, okay, come alongside, and hey, but really look at all the world.
And that's how our conversation started, albeit not recorded. It was all this, I don't like what you're saying, you must be a bad person. Equally, to be, and we should look in more of this, because I must admit, I judge religious people very harshly.
I do too.
I immediately assume that they are a bunch of whatevers, and I find it very distasteful. I immediately assume that there's, I do. Why? That's stupid, isn't it? That's just so intolerant of me.
I know. You know what's funny is I can think right now of two religious friends that when I would talk to them, I would say to them, I don't think of you as religious, I think of you as spiritual, because of how they would come up. But they are very much members of a church that is probably a little more structured than I would ever want to do. But it could just be because I already have that aversion to the word God. Like, I can see my one friend, him singing, he likes to listen to Christian music, and I'm always like, ooh, because it's just like, it says God and all that stuff. Yeah.
I remember my sister as an adult, and she moved somewhere and she joined the church. I'm like, are you mad? Like, why does anyone willingly go to church? I assumed you just went as a child because I had to. I didn't ever assume that anybody. I find this really interesting about Americans as well. So you're far more into your church than I think we are. Yeah. And I get the hypocrisy. Not hypocrisy, that's not the right word, but like, I did not understand the sectarianism in Scotland. Like, it was right over my head. So I remember talking about American, I don't understand that you even bring up Christian. And to go back to where I went to school in Africa, so I was not part of the British system, but I did not realize that there was this Catholic Protestant thing. I was completely oblivious to it. Noticed it in American stuff, and I'd be like, is that a thing? Like, is that a thing? And I think it was Gary probably said, where have you been all your life? And I was like, well, not here, to be fair. So I didn't know. But yeah, sectarian's a thing as well. And I Gary talks about that because he was Protestant. So he talks about there was a Catholic school, and that's just a little village in Scotland. Like, it's not, yeah, anyway.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, we could go on, but I feel like we're at a really good place.
Interesting. We do need to go back to the beliefs. Tell you one thing about beliefs. All my unworthy, not good enough went ding, ding, ding when you started talking about your spirit guides Jesus and Moses. And I'm like, what's wrong with me? I don't have these people.
No.
Jesus wouldn't dare come into my tent.
Oh,
Like,
stop it. Oh, please. There's a reason why they're there. It's just why they're all one. We're all
studying the mystics. I mean, if Jesus wandered into my, it would never even occur to me to ask.
When he showed up, I was like, oh God, no. Yeah, he like took mine. He's like, nope, it's time. And then part of what they said was understand, which is why. Okay, so we're in book. For those of you who don't know, we have a book club together too. But that was why I said we should read fiction to understand other religions, because my guides had actually said you need to understand religion so you can talk about this stuff. Meet people where they are so you can talk to them about the message of.
Stop speaking to them in High German.
Ja, well, kann ich doch auch. That might not have been high. No, that was high. That might not have been High German. That might have been Hessisch. But
say it again.
I lived in a part of Germany it's called Hessen is the state, and so sometimes I don't know. I studied German and then I lived there, and so I picked up slang, not knowing it was slang. So sometimes someone will hear me speak and I'll throw. But I think what I said is more high. I could be ich bin. Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter.
German to me, love.
Yeah, well, this is doch.
Foreign to me, love.
Yep. Yeah. Anyway, okay. Well, I think we're in a really good spot. All right, so we'll leave it at that.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
We can always come back to it.
I have a feeling we will. I feel like we got a basis, like there's a foundation of this. So it's like, as we move forward, people will just say, hey, go back to this conversation if you want to know what the hell we're talking about. So, okay.
Yeah, so if you have any comments or you want us to explore anything deeper, anything like that, please make your comments below here on YouTube. You can do it on Facebook. You can find us on Instagram. That's not really for comments, so it's Instagram, but you can follow us on all these platforms as well. We would really love to hear from you. We would love for you to suggest things for us to talk about, comments you have, whatever you have to say. That'd be great. So I'm Kate Foggo. As always, this is Julie Hurt. Hi, German Julie Hurt. And and we are making light to humans being. Thank you for watching.